She never expected her life to smell like industrial bleach and broken dreams. Eliza Morgan pushed her cart through the marble corridors of the Whitmore Global Ventures building, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly against the polished floor. At 3:47 a.m., Boston slept outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside, the corporate world hummed with the quiet energy of ambition that never rested. The irony wasn't lost on her. 6 months ago, she'd been analyzing contract law in a cramped Lyon apartment, her French professor praising her exceptional grasp of legal terminology. Now she was scrubbing the same fingerprints off glass doors that ambitious executives had touched during their million-dollar deals. Quelle ironie, she whispered to herself, wringing out the mop with more force than necessary. What irony, indeed. The 20th floor was always her favorite. Not because it was easier. Executives were surprisingly messy, but because of the silence. Here she could think without the constant hum of anxiety that followed her everywhere else. Here she could pretend for just a few hours that her mother's medication costs weren't keeping her awake at night, that her student loans weren't a mountain she'd never climb, that this was temporary. She hummed softly as she worked, a French lullaby her host mother in Lyon used to sing. The melody echoed through the empty conference room, bouncing off mahogany tables where decisions worth more than her yearly salary were made daily. What she didn't know was that someone was listening. Silas Whitmore stood in his corner office, 30 feet away, watching her reflection in his window. For 3 months he'd noticed her, not because she was particularly noticeable, but because she was extraordinarily careful. She moved through the building like she was protecting something precious, treating each surface with a respect that most people didn't show their own homes. Tonight, like every night for the past 12 weeks, he found himself staying later than necessary, telling himself it was work, knowing it was something else entirely. She finished the conference room and moved toward the break area, still humming. Silas had learned to recognize her rhythm. Efficient, never rushed, never lazy. She left small notes for the day staff. Coffee pot cleaned extra thoroughly today. Or restocked the good pens in the supply closet. Have a great day. No one ever thanked her. He'd noticed that too. As she approached the executive wing, Silas quickly returned to his desk, pretending to review quarterly reports. Through his glass office walls, he watched her work. She moved with the precision of someone who had learned to make the invisible matter. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, but a few strands escaped, catching the fluorescent light. She was beautiful, he realized, not in the obvious way that turned heads at board meetings, but in the quiet way that made you want to understand the story behind someone's eyes. Eliza reached his office door and paused. She'd noticed the light on, the figure hunched over paperwork. She'd noticed him before, the man who stayed too late, who never seemed to have anyone waiting for him at home. She'd been curious about his story too, though she'd never admit it. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass. She looked away first, cheeks flushing, and continued down the hallway. Neither of them knew that in exactly 7 days everything would change. Because sometimes the most important moments of our lives begin with nothing more than a glance between strangers in an empty building, while the rest of the world sleeps. And sometimes, the person who saves you is the one you never thought to notice. The Medicaid rejection letter arrived on a Tuesday like most bad news seemed to. Eliza stared at the envelope on her kitchen table, her coffee growing cold as her mother's voice drifted from the living room. Another telemedicine appointment. Another doctor explaining why the cheaper generic medications should work just as well. They both knew they didn't. "Eliza, honey, can you come here?" Her mother's voice carried that particular strain that meant the anxiety was winning today. Margaret Morgan sat on their second-hand couch, laptop balanced precariously on her knees, talking to Dr. Hoffman through a pixelated video call. At 52, she looked older, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix, the kind that came from losing a husband, a house, and hope in the span of 18 months. "The doctor says we can try splitting the Lexapro in half," Margaret whispered, covering the laptop's microphone. "Make it last longer." Eliza's chest tightened. She'd researched this. Splitting pills changed their absorption rate. It wasn't safe, but it was what people did when they couldn't afford to be safe. "Mom, let me talk to him." "Mrs. Morgan?" Dr. Hoffman's tinny voice continued through the speakers. "I understand the financial constraints, but we need to maintain therapeutic levels." "Doctor?" Eliza interrupted, leaning into the camera's view. "What's the absolute minimum dosage that would still be effective? And are there any patient assistance programs we haven't tried?" She watched his expression change slightly. He wasn't used to family members who spoke his language. Well, there's a manufacturer's program, but the waiting list is typically 6 months. 6 months. Eliza calculated quickly. At their current rate, they had maybe 6 weeks of medication left. After the call ended, Margaret retreated to her bedroom for what she called rest. But what Eliza knew was hiding. The guilt of being a burden, the shame of needing help, the fear of what happened when the pills ran out. Eliza sat alone in their cramped apartment, surrounded by the familiar soundtrack of their lives. The upstairs neighbor's television, the radiator's persistent knock, the distant hum of traffic on Route 1. This was temporary, she told herself. Everything was temporary. Her phone buzzed. A text from her supervisor at the cleaning company. Building management requested you specifically for the executive floors. Good work, Morgan. She should have felt proud. Instead, she felt hollow. Being the best at being invisible wasn't exactly the career trajectory she'd dreamed of in those lion lecture halls. That night, she arrived at Whitmore Global with a different energy. More focused, more desperate. She needed this job to become something more, somehow. She needed invisible to become indispensable. The 20th floor felt different too. Maybe it was her imagination, but the corner office light stayed on longer these days. Sometimes she caught glimpses of him, the man with tired eyes and expensive suits who worked while the world slept. Tonight he emerged from his office as she was finishing the break room. "Excuse me." His voice was softer than she'd expected. "I don't think we've been properly introduced." Eliza froze, cloth in hand. In 3 months, no executive had spoken to her directly. They looked through her, around her, but never at her. "I'm Silas Whitmore." He extended his hand. She stared at it for a moment. Her hand smelled like disinfectant. His probably smelled like success. "Eliza Morgan," she said, shaking his hand briefly. "I wanted to thank you for the notes you leave, the small touches. They don't go unnoticed." Heat rose in her cheeks. "It's just, people work hard here. They deserve to come into a space that feels cared for." Something shifted in his expression. "That's a beautiful way to look at it." An awkward silence stretched between them. She was acutely aware of her uniform, her cart, the gulf between their worlds. "Well, I should let you get back to work," he said, but he didn't move immediately. "Mr. Whitmore?" The words escaped before she could stop them. "Do you ever wonder what your life would look like if you'd made different choices?" The question hung in the air like a challenge neither of them expected. He studied her face for a long moment, and she saw something she recognized, the weight of paths not taken. "Every single day," he admitted, and in that moment, Eliza realized that maybe they weren't from such different worlds after all. Maybe they were both just trying to figure out how to build something meaningful from the pieces life had left them. But what she didn't know was that in 5 days, she'd have the chance to prove that some pieces, when put together right, could create something extraordinary. Some conversations change everything, even when nothing actually happens. For 3 nights after their unexpected introduction, Eliza found herself listening for Silas's footsteps in the hallway. Not because she was looking for another conversation, she told herself she wasn't that foolish, but because his presence had shifted something in the building's rhythm. He'd started leaving his office door open while she worked nearby. Not obviously, not in a way that felt invasive, but just enough that she could see him reviewing documents, taking calls with what sounded like overseas clients, occasionally running his hands through his hair when he thought no one was watching. She began to notice things. How he kept a framed photo turned face down on his desk. How he drank his coffee black, like someone who'd forgotten that life could be sweetened. How he never seemed to eat the catered meals that arrived for evening meetings, as if he'd lost the habit of taking care of himself. On Friday night, she was restocking the supply closet when she heard him on the phone, speaking what sounded like broken Spanish to someone who was clearly frustrated with his pronunciation. No. El contrato, importante, muy importante. Eliza winced. His accent was painful, but his effort was genuine. She could tell he was trying to close a deal with a Latin American client, probably Mexico or Colombia based on the formalities he was attempting. When he hung up, she heard him curse softly. She shouldn't interfere. She was the cleaning lady. She was invisible. But invisibility had its advantages. She'd heard enough of these conversations to know that Whitmore Global was expanding into South American markets, and they were struggling with the cultural nuances that couldn't be translated through Google. Before she could talk herself out of it, she knocked on his open door. "Mr. Whitmore? I'm sorry, I couldn't help but overhear." He looked up, startled. "Eliza, I didn't realize you were still here." You're Spanish, she said carefully. If you don't mind me saying, you might have better luck if you started with Buenos dias, ¿cómo está usted? Instead of jumping straight to business. Latin American clients prefer to establish personal connection first. Silas stared at her. You speak Spanish? Hablo español, francés, et bien sûr English. The words flowed naturally, each language carrying its own music. I studied international law. Languages were essential. Something clicked in his expression. Studied. Past tense. Eliza felt exposed suddenly, like she'd revealed more than she intended. Things change. Life happens. What kind of law? She hesitated. This was dangerous territory, the space between who she used to be and who she was now. Contract law, international trade agreements, nothing that matters anymore. Everything matters, he said quietly. The words hung between them, heavier than either expected. The client you were speaking with, she continued, deflecting. If they're from Mexico City, they're probably 3 generations into their family business. They won't sign anything with someone they don't trust personally. You should ask about their family, their city, maybe mention how much you've heard about Mexican hospitality. Silas leaned back in his chair, studying her with new intensity. How do you know so much about Mexican business culture? I wrote my thesis on cross-cultural contract negotiations in emerging markets. The admission slipped out before she could stop it. Before everything fell apart. For a moment, the corporate executive and the cleaning lady disappeared, leaving just 2 people who understood what it meant to have dreams interrupted by reality. Eliza? Silas said carefully. If you're not too busy tomorrow night, would you consider helping me prepare for Monday's call? I could pay you consulting rates. Her heart hammered. This was everything she'd hoped for and everything she feared. Mr. Whitmore, I appreciate the offer, but I'm just the cleaning lady. People talk. If they see me in meetings, then we won't call it a meeting, he said. We'll call it cultural education. Off the books. Just 2 people having a conversation about business. She wanted to say yes so badly it physically hurt. But wanting things, hoping for things, that's how you ended up disappointed. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, take all the time you need. As she gathered her cleaning supplies, Silas called after her softly. Eliza, for what it's worth, I think your dreams are worth more than you know. She paused at the doorway, not trusting herself to turn around. Good night, Mr. Whitmore. Good night. She walked away knowing that Monday would either be just another day or the beginning of everything she'd stopped letting herself hope for. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, invisible was about to become extraordinary. The decision was made at 6:23 a.m., somewhere between her mother's morning pills and burnt toast. Margaret sat at their small kitchen table, counting medications into a weekly pill organizer, a ritual that had become as routine as breathing and twice as depressing. Each compartment represented another day of managing, not living. Mom, what if things could be different? Eliza asked, buttering the toast she'd rescued from the toaster. Different how, sweetheart? Eliza hesitated. How do you explain hope to someone who's forgotten how to hold it? What if I had a chance to use my education again? Would you want me to take it? Margaret's hands paused over the pills. Eliza, honey, you know I support whatever makes you happy. But, she trailed off, the unspoken concern hanging between them. But what? But people like us don't usually get second chances. And when we reach for things that seem too good to be true, Margaret's voice carried the weight of every disappointment she'd swallowed to keep moving forward. They usually are, Eliza finished. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. They sat in silence, eating toast that tasted like cardboard and dreams deferred. Outside their window, Boston was waking up. Joggers heading to the common, coffee shops opening, people rushing toward lives that felt purposeful. Eliza's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Good morning, Eliza. I hope you slept well. No pressure about tonight, but if you decide to help, I'll be in my office around 7 p.m. Silas. Her heart did something complicated. He'd given her his personal number. He'd said no pressure, but the message itself was pressure, the gentle kind that acknowledged her choice while making it clear he was hoping. Who's that? Margaret asked, noticing her daughter's expression. Someone from work. The cleaning company doesn't usually text on weekends. Eliza showed her the message, watching her mother's eyebrows rise. Silas? That's a nice name. Sounds distinguished. Mom, I'm just saying, when was the last time a man texted you good morning? This isn't about romance, it's about work. Margaret smiled, the first genuine smile Eliza had seen in weeks. "Honey, I've been married and widowed. I know the difference between work texts and texts from someone who's thinking about you." Heat crept up Eliza's neck. "Even if that were true, which it's not, he's my boss's boss's boss. She gestured helplessly. "He's from a different universe. So were your father and I." Eliza blinked. "What do you mean? You think I haven't told you this story?" Margaret settled back in her chair, her medication ritual forgotten. "Your father was a Harvard MBA when I met him. I was working 3 jobs to pay for community college. He used to come into the diner where I waitressed, always ordered the same thing: coffee, black, and apple pie. Terrible tipper. Dad was a bad tipper? Horrible. But he always stayed until closing, reading financial newspapers and asking me questions about my economics classes. Turns out he was more impressed by someone working 3 jobs and maintaining a 4.0 GPA than by anyone he met in business school." Eliza had heard pieces of this story, but never this version. Never the part about different universes. "The point," Margaret continued, "is that good people recognize other good people, regardless of circumstances. And sometimes the best opportunities come disguised as the scariest decisions." At 6:47 p.m., Eliza stood outside the Whitmore Global building, her reflection wavering in the glass doors. She'd changed clothes 4 times, finally settling on dark jeans and a sweater that said, "Professional but not trying too hard." Her hands shook as she texted back, "I'll be there in 5 minutes." The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt eternal. Each floor dinged past like a countdown to either the best or worst decision of her life. The hallway was empty, but light spilled from Silas's office. She could see him through the glass walls, surrounded by papers and files, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. She knocked softly. "Eliza?" His smile was relieved, genuine. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I," she admitted. "Thank you for taking the chance." As she stepped into his office, not to clean it but to belong in it, Eliza realized that some decisions don't just change your day, they change who you're allowed to become. And tonight, for the first time in months, she was about to find out who that might be. Everything she thought she knew about herself was about to be proven wrong. Silas had arranged his office differently. Instead of the imposing desk setup that screamed corporate hierarchy, he'd moved 2 chairs to face each other near the window. A small table between them held legal documents, 2 cups of coffee, and what looked like homemade cookies. "I wasn't sure if you'd eaten," he said, following her gaze. "Mrs. Henley from accounting made these. She insists they cure everything from stress to broken hearts." Eliza smiled despite her nerves. "Does she know you're sharing them with the cleaning lady?" "She knows I'm sharing them with someone important." The simple statement hung in the air. Important. When was the last time someone had called her that? "So," Silas began, settling into his chair with an ease that suggested this was how he preferred to do business. Personal, direct, human. "Tell me about Mexico." For the next hour, Eliza found herself in a place she hadn't been since Lyon. Intellectually engaged, professionally respected, genuinely heard. She explained the nuances of Mexican business culture, the importance of personal relationships, the subtle art of building trust across cultural divides. "In your opening call," she suggested, "don't start with numbers. Ask about his family's business history. Mexican companies that have survived 3 generations take enormous pride in that legacy. Show respect for what they've built." Silas took notes like a student, occasionally asking questions that revealed how quickly he absorbed information. "What about the contract terms? We're offering standard international rates." "Standard for whom?" Eliza challenged gently. "What standard in Boston might feel dismissive in Mexico City? Consider offering something that acknowledges their local expertise. Maybe a cultural consultation clause or preferred rates for referrals within their network." "You're brilliant at this," Silas said suddenly. The compliment hit her like cold water. "I'm just—" "Don't." His voice was firm but kind. "Don't diminish what you know. I've sat through $1,000,000 consulting sessions that provided half the insight you've given me in an hour." Eliza looked down at her hands, still not quite able to accept praise she'd forgotten how to receive. "Can I ask you something?" Silas continued. "What happened? In France, I mean. You don't have to answer, but law school doesn't usually end with night shifts." The question she'd been dreading, the story she'd practiced not telling. "My father died," she said simply. "Sudden heart attack, no life insurance. Mom fell apart, clinically, not just emotionally. I came home to help thinking it would be temporary, But Mom's medical bills, Dad's business debts, my student loans. She shrugged. Temporary became permanent. And you've been carrying all of that alone? Not alone. Mom and I, we're a team. We just play defense more than offense these days. Silas was quiet for a moment, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. Eliza, what if I told you that our international expansion has been struggling precisely because we lack cultural competency? What if I told you that what you've shared tonight is exactly what we need? Her heart began to race. I'd say that sounds too good to be true. What if it wasn't? Before she could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and winced. I'm sorry, I have to take this. It's the Mexico City client. As Silas answered in his halting Spanish, Eliza watched him struggle through pleasantries that were clearly not landing well. She could hear the client's growing impatience even from across the desk. Without thinking, she gestured for the phone. Silas hesitated for a moment, then handed it over. Buenos días, señor Vázquez. Elisa began smoothly. Disculpe la interrupción. Soy Elisa Morgan, consultora cultural de Whitmore Global. ¿Cómo está su familia? The change in the client's tone was immediate. Warm, engaged, curious about this woman, who spoke not just his language, but understood his priorities. For 15 minutes, Eliza navigated the conversation with a grace that came from understanding both cultures intimately. She asked about his grandfather's company, praised Mexico's business innovation, and gently guided the discussion toward collaboration rather than transaction. When she hung up, Silas was staring at her with something approaching awe. He wants to meet in person, she said quietly. Next Friday, he's flying to Boston specifically to discuss partnership terms. Partnership, not just a contract. Partnership. Silas stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked the city. Eliza, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Her pulse hammered. She knew what was coming, and she knew it would change everything. How would you feel about not cleaning this building anymore? The question hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was brave enough to cross. But maybe, just maybe, she was about to find out. Sometimes the scariest word in the English language is yes. Eliza stared at Silas, his question echoing in the space between them like a challenge she wasn't sure she was equipped to meet. How would she feel about not cleaning this building anymore? The honest answer was terrifying, hopeful. What exactly are you asking me? She said carefully. Silas returned to his chair, leaning forward with the intensity of someone who'd just discovered something valuable. I'm asking if you'd consider joining Whitmore Global as our Director of International Cultural Relations. Full benefits, competitive salary, your own office. He paused. A chance to use everything you learned in France. The words hit her like a physical force. Director, office, competitive salary. Things she'd stopped allowing herself to dream about. Silas, I appreciate this, I really do, but before you say no, let me tell you what competitive means. He wrote a number on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. Eliza looked down and felt the world tilt. The salary was more than triple what she made cleaning. It was enough to cover her mother's medications without rationing, enough to start paying down her student loans, enough to breathe. This is too much, she whispered. It's exactly what you're worth, what you've always been worth. Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes. But I'm not qualified. I don't have a degree, I don't have experience. You just secured a partnership deal that our team of Harvard MBAs couldn't close in 6 months. You did it in 15 minutes. His voice was gentle but firm. Eliza, qualifications aren't just about pieces of paper. They're about understanding, insight, ability. You have all three. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Boston sparkled below them, a city full of people who belonged in places like this. People will talk. They'll say I slept my way into this position. Let them talk. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who'll be called. The woman who saved $1 million deal? The expert who opened new markets? The professional who earned her position through competence? Silas joined her at the window. Eliza, I know this is scary, but hiding your light doesn't protect anyone. She closed her eyes, fighting between the part of her that wanted to run and the part that was tired of running. What about the cleaning company? I can't just abandon my responsibilities. We'll give them proper notice, 2 weeks, and we'll recommend you so highly that they'll use your story in their training programs. My mother's medical care. Full health insurance starts immediately. Better coverage than Medicaid. Each objection she raised, he had an answer for. Not the desperate answers of someone trying to convince her, but the practical solutions of someone who'd already thought this through. Why me? she asked finally. You could hire someone with credentials, experience, connections. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Because credentials can be taught, but character can't. Because experience without empathy is just privilege. Because connections without authenticity are just networking. He turned to face her fully. And because in 3 months of watching you work, I've seen someone who treats every task like it matters, every person like they're valuable, every opportunity like it's sacred. The sincerity in his voice broke something open in her chest. I need to talk to my mother, she said. Of course. And I need to think about this. Really think about it. Take all the time you need. She gathered her purse, her mind spinning with possibilities and terrors. At the door, she turned back. Silas, if I do this, if I take this chance, what happens between us? The question she'd been afraid to ask hung in the air. I don't know, he said honestly. But I know that whatever happens, it needs to be your choice. Your career, your terms, your timeline. She nodded, appreciating his honesty more than any promise he could have made. I'll give you my answer Monday morning. Monday morning. As the elevator descended, carrying her away from the 20th floor and toward a decision that would change everything, Eliza realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of the future. She was afraid of wanting it too much. But maybe that was exactly the kind of fear worth facing. The hardest conversations happen in kitchens at midnight. Eliza found her mother exactly where she expected, sitting at their small table, nursing cold tea and pretending to read a paperback romance. The kind of book where everything worked out in the end, where love conquered practical concerns, where people like them got happy endings. How did it go? Margaret asked without looking up. Eliza sat down across from her, the weight of the evening settling in her bones. He offered me a job. What kind of job? The kind that would change everything. Margaret finally looked up, studying her daughter's face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to read between lines. Tell me. So Eliza did. She told her about the salary that would cover medications without rationing, about health insurance that wouldn't require begging, about a position that would use everything she'd studied in France. She told her about Silas's respect, about feeling valuable again, about the terrifying possibility that maybe she deserved good things. When she finished, Margaret was quiet for a long time. What's the catch? She asked finally. Mom, honey, I've been poor long enough to know that opportunities like this don't just fall from the sky. What's the catch? Eliza sighed. People will think I didn't earn it. They'll think I'm sleeping with him. Are you? Mom, it's a reasonable question. Are you attracted to him? Heat crept up Eliza's neck. We're not, it's complicated. Margaret smiled, the knowing smile of someone who'd been young once. Complicated how? He's not what I expected. He's kind, and he sees me, really sees me, in a way that most people don't. Eliza wrapped her hands around her own cold mug. But I can't tell if what I'm feeling is real or just gratitude, and I can't build a career on maybe. Smart girl. So what do I do? Margaret reached across the table and took her daughter's hands. Eliza, what did your father always say about taking chances? The biggest risk is not taking any risk at all. And what do I say about people who judge women for succeeding? That their opinions aren't paying our bills? Exactly. Margaret squeezed her hands. Baby, you've been carrying this family for months. You've sacrificed your dreams to take care of mine. If someone is offering you a chance to use your brain instead of a mop, you take it. But what if I fail? What if you don't? The simple question hung between them like a revelation. Besides, Margaret continued, worst-case scenario, you fail spectacularly and end up right back where you started. Except you'll have tried, and trying is the only way to find out what you're capable of. They sat in comfortable silence, two women who'd learned that hope was a luxury they couldn't afford, slowly allowing themselves to believe in it again. There's something else, Eliza said quietly. The meeting with the Mexican client is Friday. If I mess that up, you won't. How can you be so sure? Margaret stood up, kissing the top of her daughter's head. Because I raised you. Because you're brilliant and capable and stronger than you know. And because some things are meant to be. Monday morning arrived with the kind of October chill that promised winter was coming. Eliza stood in front of her closet, holding the one professional outfit she'd kept from her lion days, a charcoal gray suit that still fit, but felt like a costume from another life. She'd made her decision somewhere between midnight and dawn, in that quiet space where fear and courage lived side by side. At 9 a.m. sharp, she walked into the Whitmore Global building, not through the service entrance with her cleaning cart, but through the main lobby, her reflection confident in the polished marble floor. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt different this time. Not like she was sneaking into a world where she didn't belong, but like she was finally going home. Silas was waiting in his office, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "Good morning," she said, standing in his doorway. "Good morning. Have you decided?" Eliza took a deep breath, thinking of her mother's words, her father's wisdom, and her own tired heart that was ready to stop hiding. "Mr. Whitmore," she said formally, then smiled. "When do I start?" The relief that flooded his face was worth every moment of terror that had brought her here. But as he stood to shake her hand, their first interaction as equals, Eliza realized that the hardest part wasn't saying yes. The hardest part was going to be proving she deserved it. The whispers started before she even reached her new office. "That's her, the cleaning lady who got promoted. I heard she speaks languages or something. Please, we all know how she really got that position." Eliza walked down the hallway of the 15th floor, her heels clicking against the same marble she used to mop, pretending she couldn't hear the conversations that died when she passed. Her new office was smaller than Silas's, but had a window, a real desk, and a nameplate that read, "Eliza Morgan, Director of International Cultural Relations." She'd been staring at that nameplate for 3 days now, still not quite believing it belonged to her. The worst part wasn't the whispers. She'd expected those. The worst part was the isolation. Her former cleaning colleagues avoided her, uncomfortable with her sudden transformation. Her new colleagues treated her with polite suspicion, waiting for her to prove she belonged or confirm their assumptions about how she'd gotten there. Only Silas seemed genuinely happy about her presence, but their interactions had become carefully professional. No more late-night conversations by windows. No more shared glances across empty hallways. The invisible boundary between them had become very visible, and Eliza wasn't sure if she missed crossing it or was relieved it existed. Thursday afternoon brought her first real test. The Mexican client, Senor Vasquez, would arrive tomorrow, and the entire partnership deal rested on a meeting she was expected to lead. "Eliza?" Silas knocked on her office door. "Do you have a minute?" She looked up from the cultural briefing she'd been preparing. Of course. He closed the door behind him, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the assistant who happened to be walking by. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" "Terrified," she admitted. "What if I can't deliver? What if the phone call was just luck?" It wasn't luck. He sat across from her desk, and for a moment, the professional distance melted away. "Eliza, I need you to know something. There are people in this building who want you to fail." Her stomach clenched. "I know. But there are also people who are watching to see what's possible. Young women, immigrants, people who've been told they don't belong in places like this." His voice was gentle but firm. "Tomorrow isn't just about a business deal. It's about proving that talent matters more than pedigree." The weight of representation settled on her shoulders. "No pressure, right?" "No pressure," he smiled. "Just an opportunity to change everything." That evening, Eliza stayed late to prepare, running through her presentation one more time. The building was almost empty when she heard familiar footsteps in the hallway. "Working late again, I see." She looked up to find Gladys Washington, the head of night security, standing in her doorway. Gladys had been kind to her during the cleaning days, one of the few people who'd treated her like a person instead of furniture. "Hi, Gladys, just preparing for tomorrow. Mind if I come in?" Gladys stepped into the office, looking around approvingly. "Nice space. You've earned it." "Have I?" The question slipped out before Eliza could stop it. Gladys studied her with the wisdom of someone who'd spent 40 years watching people navigate corporate hierarchies. "Honey, I've seen a lot of folks come and go in this building. I've seen people promote family members, golf buddies, and yes, sometimes people they're sleeping with." She paused. "But I've also seen Mr. Whitmore work. He's not the type to risk his reputation on anything but excellence. People always think, the question is, what do you know?" Eliza considered this. "I know I'm qualified. I know I earned this opportunity. I know I have something valuable to offer. Then that's all that matters." After Gladys left, Eliza sat alone in her office looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow she would either prove that she belonged here or confirm everyone's worst assumptions. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Remember what your father used to say about butterflies?" Eliza smiled, typing back. "Butterflies can't see their own wings, but everyone else can see how beautiful they are." "Exactly. Fly tomorrow, baby. We'll all be watching." As she gathered her papers to leave, Eliza caught her reflection in the dark window. She looked different than she had 4 months ago. More confident, more purposeful, like someone who belonged in an office with her name on the door. Tomorrow would determine if that reflection was real or just wishful thinking. But tonight, for the first time since accepting this position, she felt ready to find out. Because sometimes the most important flight happens when you finally stop apologizing for having wings. Some moments define who you become, and they rarely happen when you're ready for them. Senor Eduardo Vasquez arrived at Whitmore Global at exactly 10 a.m., accompanied by his daughter Carmen and their legal advisor. Eliza watched from her office window as they stepped out of their black sedan, three people whose decision would either validate everything she'd worked toward or destroy it completely. In the conference room, 8 Whitmore executives sat around the mahogany table, their expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. Silas sat at the head, but all eyes were on Eliza as she arranged her presentation materials with hands that refused to stop trembling. "Buenos días, Señor Vasquez," she began as the Mexican delegation entered. "Es un honor conocerle en persona." Señor Vasquez's face lit up with recognition. "Ah, Señorita Morgan," the voice that speaks not just our language, but our heart. The Whitmore executives exchanged glances. Whatever they'd expected, it wasn't this immediate warmth. For the next hour, Eliza guided the conversation with a precision that surprised even herself. She presented market analyses in fluent Spanish, addressed cultural concerns with empathy, and navigated complex contractual discussions with an ease that made the Harvard MBAs around the table lean forward with interest. But it was the moment when Señor Vasquez's phone rang that everything changed. He apologized, explaining in rapid Spanish that it was his grandson calling from the hospital. The boy had been in an accident. Nothing serious, but scary enough for a worried grandfather. While the other executives sat in uncomfortable silence, not understanding the crisis unfolding, Eliza quietly stood and placed a gentle hand on Señor Vasquez's shoulder. "Su nieto está bien?" she asked softly. "Is your grandson okay?" Through his explanation, she learned that 8-year-old Miguel had fallen from his bicycle and needed stitches. Señor Vasquez was torn between staying for this crucial meeting and flying home to be with his family. "Señor Vasquez," Eliza said in English, ensuring everyone could understand, "family comes first. Always. The partnership we're discussing is built on trust and respect, qualities that start with how we treat the people we love." She turned to Silas. "I suggest we postpone this meeting. Give Señor Vasquez time to be with his grandson. A partnership built under pressure isn't a partnership built to last." The room fell silent. Business executives simply didn't walk away from million-dollar deals because of family emergencies. Schedules, deadlines, and bottom lines took precedence. But Señor Vasquez's eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, the recognition that he was dealing with people who understood what truly mattered. "Señorita Morgan," he said, standing and taking her hands, "this is exactly why we want to work with Whitmore Global. Not because of your contracts or your profits, but because of your people, because of you." He turned to address the room. "We will sign the partnership agreement, but not today. Today, I go home to my grandson. Next week, I return with my full board of directors, and we discuss not just one project, but a 5-year strategic alliance." After the Mexican delegation left, the conference room buzzed with excitement. A 5-year alliance was worth exponentially more than the original contract they'd been pursuing. But as the executives filed out, chattering about projections and possibilities, one voice cut through the celebration. Convenient how the cleaning lady knew exactly what to say to make herself look good. Eliza turned to find Jonathan Prescott, Senior Vice President and Harvard Legacy, smirking at her from across the table. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "Oh, come on. Walking away from a deal to play the sympathy card? Very touching, very strategic. Did they teach you that manipulation technique in night school?" The room went silent. Every person remaining, including Silas, watched to see how she would respond. Eliza felt the familiar heat of shame rising in her chest. The voice that had whispered for months that she didn't belong here, that she was fooling herself, that people like Jonathan Prescott would always see through her pretenses. But then she thought of Señor Vasquez's grandson, of her own mother counting pills, of Gladys watching from the security desk, of every person who'd been dismissed because their credentials didn't match their capabilities. She stood slowly, meeting Jonathan's gaze with steady eyes. "Mr. Prescott," she said, her voice calm and clear, "I didn't walk away from a deal. I recognize that real partnerships are built on shared values, not manufactured deadlines. If you can't tell the difference between manipulation and compassion, then perhaps you're in the wrong business." The silence stretched. until Silas cleared his throat. "I think this meeting is over," he said firmly. As people filed out, Jonathan paused at the door. "This isn't finished," he said quietly. "You're right," Eliza replied. "It's just beginning." When the room finally emptied except for her and Silas, he approached slowly. "That was," he began. "Stupid, reckless, career-ending, brilliant," he said softly. "That was absolutely brilliant." But as Eliza gathered her papers with hands that had finally stopped shaking, she realized that proving she belonged was only the first challenge. Now she had to survive the people who didn't want her to succeed. The final battle always happens when you think you've already won. Monday morning brought news that should have been cause for celebration. Senor Vasquez had returned with his full board, ready to sign the 5-year strategic alliance. But Eliza arrived at her office to find an email that made her blood run cold. "Ms. Morgan, please report to HR immediately regarding allegations of professional misconduct." Janet Holbrook, Human Resources Director. Her hand shook as she reread the message. Professional misconduct. The words every person who'd clawed their way up from nothing feared most. The HR office felt like a tribunal. Janet Holbrook sat behind her desk with the expression of someone delivering a cancer diagnosis. Across from her, Jonathan Prescott lounged in a chair with barely concealed satisfaction. "Ms. Morgan," Janet began, "we've received serious allegations regarding your conduct and qualifications." "What kind of allegations?" Jonathan leaned forward. "Let's start with the fact that you lied on your employment application. You listed yourself as having international business experience when you were employed as custodial staff. I never claimed. And then there's the question of your relationship with Mr. Whitmore. Multiple employees have reported seeing you in his office after hours, engaging in what appeared to be intimate conversations." Eliza's chest tightened. "Those were work meetings, cultural consultations, very cozy consultations," Jonathan smirked. "Look, we all know how these things work. You saw an opportunity, you used your assets to get close to the CEO, and now you're in over your head." The room spun slightly. This was exactly what she'd feared, exactly what had kept her awake at night. "That's not true, isn't it? You go from mopping floors to a director-level position in a matter of days. You have no MBA, no corporate experience, no credentials that would justify—" "I have 3 years of international law study, fluency in 4 languages, and I just secured the largest partnership deal in this company's history," Eliza said, her voice stronger than she felt. "A deal that conveniently required postponing, giving you time to coach the client, perhaps even feed him information about our negotiation strategy." Janet shuffled papers with obvious discomfort. "Ms. Morgan, these are serious allegations. Corporate espionage, falsification of credentials, inappropriate relationships with supervisors." "I want to see Mr. Whitmore," Eliza said. "Mr. Whitmore is in meetings all morning," Jonathan replied smoothly. "Besides, this doesn't concern him. This is about you, your lies, and your inappropriate behavior." For a moment, Eliza felt herself shrinking, becoming small again, invisible again. The voice in her head whispered that maybe they were right. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe she should just disappear back into the shadows where people like her belonged. But then she remembered her mother's words about butterflies, Senor Vasquez's respect, Gladys's wisdom, her father's belief that the biggest risk was not taking any risk at all. She stood slowly, meeting Jonathan's gaze with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. "Mr. Prescott," she said quietly, "I know exactly what this is about. You're threatened by someone who achieved in weeks what you failed to do in years. Someone who understands that business is about people, not just profit margins. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that while you were trying to intimidate foreign clients with contract jargon, I was building relationships. While you were relying on your Harvard connections, I was developing actual competence. And while you were planning my downfall, I was saving this company millions of dollars." The door opened suddenly, and Silas walked in, his expression thunderous. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Janet looked relieved to see him. "Mr. Whitmore, we were just discussing some concerns about Ms. Morgan's, her qualifications, her performance, her integrity." Silas's voice was ice cold. "Because I can address all of those. Eliza Morgan is the most qualified international relations professional this company has ever employed. Her performance has been flawless, and her integrity is unquestionable." Jonathan's smugness faltered. "Sir, there are questions about how she obtained her position. She obtained her position by demonstrating exceptional skill, cultural intelligence, and business acumen. She saved the Vasquez deal. She's revolutionizing our approach to international partnerships. And she's done it all while facing exactly the kind of discrimination and small-minded prejudice that this company claims to oppose. Silas turned to Janet. As for the allegations of misconduct, I assume you have evidence, witnesses, documentation? Well, there have been reports, gossip, assumptions, jealousy. Silas's voice cut through the room like a blade, none of which constitutes evidence of wrongdoing. He looked directly at Jonathan. Mr. Prescott, I believe you have a choice to make. You can continue this petty campaign against a colleague who has outperformed you in every measurable way, or you can focus on improving your own contributions to this company. Choose wisely. Jonathan's face flushed red, but he said nothing. Janet, I want a formal apology issued to Ms. Morgan, and I want a note placed in Mr. Prescott's file documenting this incident. Are we clear? Yes, sir. As they filed out of the room, Silas touched Eliza's arm gently. Are you okay? She looked at him, really looked at him. This man who had seen her potential when she couldn't see it herself, who had defended her when she couldn't defend herself, who had believed in her when belief felt impossible. I'm more than okay, she said softly. I'm finally exactly where I belong. And for the first time since walking into that HR office, Eliza Morgan smiled, because she realized that some battles aren't about winning or losing. They're about discovering that you're stronger than you ever imagined. 6 months later, the cafe on Newberry Street had become their Saturday morning tradition, a small ritual that belonged to them alone, away from boardrooms and business cards where they could simply be Eliza and Silas instead of director and CEO. Eliza sat by the window, watching Boston wake up on a crisp April morning, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that actually tasted good instead of necessary. The Whitmore Global Quarterly Report lay open beside her laptop, showing record-breaking international partnerships that had started with a single conversation in Spanish. You're smiling, Silas observed, sliding into the seat across from her with his own coffee and a bag of pastries from the French bakery 3 blocks over. Good news in the numbers? Better news in the people, she replied, closing the report. Carmen Vasquez starts her internship next week. We have applications from 12 universities for our cultural exchange program. And, she paused, savoring the moment, MIT wants to partner with us on a cross-cultural business curriculum. Silas raised his eyebrows. MIT? That's huge, terrifying, perfect. She laughed, the sound lighter than it had been 6 months ago. They want someone to develop a program that teaches business students how to navigate cultural differences in international markets. They want you. They want me. The words still felt surreal, like speaking a language she was still learning to trust. Through the cafe window, she could see a woman about her age pushing a stroller, talking animatedly on her phone in what sounded like Portuguese. 6 months ago, Eliza might have seen her and felt the familiar pang of paths not taken. Now she saw possibility, connection, someone whose story might intersect with hers in unexpected ways. How's your mother? Silas asked, following her gaze. Good, really good. Eliza's smile deepened. She started that YouTube channel I told you about, cooking for people dealing with depression and anxiety. Simple, affordable meals that don't require much energy to make. She has 3,000 subscribers now. That's incredible. She calls it Margaret's Kitchen. Every video starts with her saying, "If you're having a hard day, this one's for you." Eliza's voice caught slightly. She's helping people. She found her way to matter again. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city move around them. The kind of silence that felt full instead of empty, connected instead of lonely. Eliza, Silas said eventually, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever miss it? The simplicity of before, when things were less complicated? She considered this, thinking of late nights with a mop and bucket, of invisible routines and unnoticed work. I miss the quiet sometimes, the way problems felt smaller when your world was smaller. She looked at him directly. But I don't miss feeling invisible. I don't miss hiding what I'm capable of. And us? Do you think we're figuring it out? It was the question that lived in the spaces between their conversations, the careful dance they'd been learning between professional respect and personal affection. I think, she said slowly, that we're building something real, slowly, honestly, without anyone having to rescue anyone else. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. I like the sound of that. As they prepared to leave, Eliza caught her reflection in the cafe window. The woman looking back at her wore confidence like a well-fitted coat, not borrowed or pretended, but earned through trials that had taught her the difference between being humble and being small. Her phone buzzed with a text from Gladys. "Saw you on the news talking about the MIT program. That girl who used to clean our floors is going to change the world. Proud of you, honey." Eliza smiled, typing back. Still the same girl, just with better lighting. Outside, Boston hummed with the energy of people building lives, chasing dreams, creating meaning from the ordinary moments that accumulated into extraordinary stories. Somewhere in the city, someone was probably mopping floors and dreaming of something more. Someone was counting pills and hoping for better days. Someone was discovering that their voice mattered, that their story had value, that invisible could become indispensable with nothing more than courage and the right opportunity. Eliza walked down Newbury Street with Silas beside her, no longer the cleaning lady who spoke French, but simply a woman who had learned that the most beautiful transformations happen not when we become someone new, but when we finally become who we were always meant to be. And in a world that often forgot to notice the people who made it run, that was revolution enough. What would you do if someone saw potential in you that you couldn't see in yourself? Would you have the courage to step into a life that felt too good to be true? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.